Hey, folks, happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of Plan A Conversations. So, listen, you all have been DMing me, telling me about the fire and the intensity of all these incredible conversations I've had in season 8. And I've been really saving this podcast episode for, I would say, the last month. You'll know who I'm talking about as soon as I introduce the young lady, because she has been in and still remains the top three listen to podcasts of Plan A Conversations, the history of this show actually being a show. And so before I get into that introduction, that conversation, I wanted to also thank you for subscribing to my 365 guided nightly meditations. Again, if you're interested in having a end sort of reflection and reevaluation point to your day, go ahead and subscribe to my nightly guided meditations available on my YouTube channel at Plan A with Klay. That's at Plan A with Klay. So the young lady you are seeing on the screen may be new to you visually, but not her voice. She was in the very first season of Plan A Conversations, and the episode was so well received, we literally marketed across LinkedIn and other online social media platforms. And again, as I said, till this day, it remains in the top 3 all listen to podcasts, and we're now in 70 plus different countries. And so before we get into part 2 of this conversation, I want to welcome the Leonne Tanis.
Hello. Thank you.
Was it dramatic enough?
It was perfect.
Now, listen, folks, if you did not listen to this podcast featuring Leonne, go back to season 1. And I would even say that before listening to this. But of course, if you don't want to do that, you're able to just follow along, I'm sure, fine. But I think the number one reason, Leonne, people was just so interested in your story is because you literally was leaving an industry that you knew of for your entire career and then decided to reposition towards this becoming a midwife. And so from a couple of years ago to where you are right now, first of all, how do you feel? How do you feel?
I feel great. It feels amazing. In preparation for this, I listened to the first one, which was, I think, it had to be at least 3 years
At
ago.
least.
When I first started the program, I was like in
Mhm.
the second month of the program. And so now to have graduated in May, have caught babies,
What?
and have like been doing the work,
Mm.
it's amazing. I feel really good.
Yeah. And so let's take a step back and go, let's say, travel back to 3 years ago when we were on the podcast. You had not begun your program at Yale. Help our listeners understand where you were at the time and what was the impetus for your decision to become a midwife.
Sure. So at the time of that podcast, I was in the RN portion of the program. So I hadn't started the midwifery side of it. And so, in coming into it, I'd never been in a birth, never experienced birth work. I had done some doula training. So I was really kind of in that conversation having still a very theoretical view of birth of the work I was going to do. And I think I was still feeling a little numb to the change.
Mm,
It hadn't quite set in what I was doing. There was
mm,
still this feeling of being unsure of what I was doing, but still it was really just having faith and just saying, this is the right thing for me. I know it is, but still being unsure of the path,
mm.
and everything, and definitely everything that would end up, kind of bringing to me. Like, I can say I was like birthed through this process. And I don't think
Whoa.
then I realized that I was beginning a second lifetime. Um, yeah.
Birth and beginning a second lifetime. So let's unpack that.
Yeah.
You're entering into this program. When did you start to realize and see for yourself that there was this metamorphosis taking place within you?
So I think it was actually quite late into the program.
Hmm.
This past year, I was living in DC,
Mm.
completing my clinical. And also having like to remember COVID came in the middle of all of this. So there was a lot of uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
in whether or not I'd be able to complete the program on time, how it would
Mm.
happen, etc. Fortunately, I was through personal connection was able to um, not really have any interruption, and I got an opportunity to go to DC and basically do all my clinical. And I would say through that process, because I was being fully integrated into midwifery, that's where I started to realize this, that I changed, that I could actually do this work, and realizing things about myself that needed to change as well. And so I would say that started to come in probably like April of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so then clearly there is the coursework that you had to do before you actually was in the like integrative part of that. Were
Mhm.
you still excited about the work during the coursework of becoming a midwife?
Um, yes, it was exciting to learn, but again, it was just all theoretical because the way I had set up my clinical studies, I had basically signed up for, I said, I don't have to be in clinical, like, I think it was like fall of when we started the program.
Mm-hmm.
We could start clinical. And I said, I don't have to be the first ones in clinical. And so I think I was slated to start clinical like that spring of 2020. And I started clinical then. So up until, so I would say for a good 6 months or so, it was still all just school, like book based learning. So I
Mm-hmm.
had no real application knowledge. And so I was excited, but it was still this, I don't really know what I'm getting into.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID happened, which disrupted my clinical, which then kind of further delayed me really understanding what it was that I was getting into.
Okay, okay. And so now we are in the midst of COVID, and you literally just gave me a great setup because I was very curious to know how in the heck did you complete the clinicals in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of having to move to DC, trying to find, an actual placement. I mean, literally like the grace of God, these things are just able to fall through. So walk us through what that process was like, for you. And also, how did you even adapt in COVID world?
So being in healthcare during COVID was interesting.
Mm,
I, you know, I realized that with each career that I've had, so in my finance career, I've been there for major disruptions. So when I started
mm,
my finance career, it was on the back of the 2000 telecommunications bubble and then the Enron scandal. And I was actually working in energy at that time. And then being in finance, 2008, 2009
mm.
disruption to the market. And now entering healthcare, COVID disruption. And it was a scary time because I had caught COVID and didn't know it. Was one of
Oh.
the early folks that got COVID. I went to New
Mm,
York, and this was before they shut everything down, kind of in a bar with a friend on the subway. And, uh, I came back and had no sense of smell or taste. So I didn't have the
mm,
cough. I didn't have all
mm,
these things, but I had that symptom before it was recognized as a COVID symptom.
mm.
So, kind of dealing with that in isolation, because it was also the uncertainty of not knowing what would happen if, I reported that I had, that I could possibly have COVID.
Right.
My school was kind of setting up these quarantine areas, and I was like, I'm not leaving my apartment. So fortunately, I lived by myself. I had enough where I just stayed in my apartment for about 3 weeks,
Were you
because they
scared at
also,
all?
yeah, because um, I didn't know what was happening,
Mm,
and there wasn't a lot of information. I didn't tell a lot of people. I told my brother
mhm.
and another good friend of mine. And so they would call me kind of regularly and ask me, how are you feeling? And that's when I started really following Twitter, because I started following people's personal accounts of what was happening to them.
Right.
And it was this kind of situation that would happen with COVID where people were like, I had a temperature, a small cough, and then I was fine. And then all of a sudden I woke up and I couldn't breathe. And so I was kind of waiting for this other shoe to drop to say,
Mm.
okay, I'm feeling fine. Yes, I can't smell or taste, but I'm feeling okay. But is it gonna turn the corner at any moment?
Right.
Um, and so, I just really, I had my Vicks, I had my ginger ale, I had, I just kind of took my temperature, I had my pulse ox. So I had like my nursing things, just to monitor my condition. Because again,
Mm.
at that time, unless you had severe symptoms, I couldn't get into the hospital. I couldn't get in
Right.
to be seen. And then they were really unsure about transmission. So,
Hmm.
it was isolating in that way, and that, I couldn't go anywhere
Right.
because there was this concern of passing it on to other people, but unsure how it passed it on because there wasn't the mask mandate at the time
Hmm.
as well. So yeah, it was scary. It was scary.
And were you getting like regular healthcare updates being in the healthcare industry? Like, how is that being sort of trickled down to you all?
So Yale would, so it was two things. One, I worked for a community health organization where the medical director would come out with his own announcements, and then Yale came out with their own announcements. Because at the time, remember, like I was still in school,
Right.
so classes had shut down, in terms of not being able to go back into the building, moving online, but the online being a temporary thing. I think at the time they were like it would be a month. And I knew, I was like, we're not going back into the building. I was like, there's just no way. There was just
Mhm.
so much uncertainty. And so, yeah, it was, I'm sorry, I forgot my train of thought, but um, yeah, I'm sorry, what was the original question?
The getting the information,
Yeah,
being
the
in
information.
healthcare.
Yeah, so there was a lot of conflicting information. And then our president at the time, 45, watching his like daily debriefs was also just a tragic mess. So
Hmm.
there wasn't a lot of consistent information. And I had finally disclosed it to the school because I think I told my advisor, and she said, you really should tell Yale because at least if anything, they'll be able to track you. Um, and so I told my primary care doctor, and so she called me every couple days. And then I also had asthma. That was the other thing. And so
Mm.
having to get that asthma pump was the other thing to make sure. And yeah, at nighttime, sometimes not being able to breathe quite so easily and not knowing if it was anxiety or COVID. So.
Yeah. And so you're literally in the midst of your own, COVID scare, and now you're having to transition to DC. How did that happen? And then walk us through, you now actually in the birthing room.
Yeah, so um, fortunately, I was fine by I think like end of March or March, and I had a very good friend who's director of midwifery at a place called Family Health and Birth Center, Community of Hope in DC, and I had already been slated to do what's called my integration, which is similar to I would say like a residency program, and she. I had reached out to her and said, "Is it possible for me to start early?"
Mm.
Because I already saw the mess that the hospital was in. Because they kicked us out of the hospitals, they kicked students out of the hospitals, so we couldn't do clinical anymore. The governor had come in and said all nursing students have to kind of leave their program, not leave the program, but
Wow.
leave their clinical sites and call this back.
Hmm.
And that was similar to many different states around the nation. And so I reached out to her and said, "Hey, how are you guys during COVID?" She said, "We're fine." And I asked her, "Can I start early?" And she said, "Sure." So I
Hmm.
spoke to my advisor. I basically told my advisors, "This is my plan." I just told the school, this is what's going to happen,
Clear.
because yeah, I was like they weren't in a position to tell me no because there
Mhm.
was already the clinical sites had already started shutting down, so there was a shrinkage,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to have to compete with my classmates for shifts. I didn't want to get things piecemeal. I just wanted to be left alone to do my
Mm.
work. because this was the moment was waiting for.
Mm.
And so I decided to move to DC. So I was able to get an apartment. My lease was ending. And so, like, within a month, I had to pack up everything, pack it into a truck, move down to DC. It was a lot of coordination.
Yeah. And how were
You
you
know,
how are you feeling emotionally, spiritually during this time? Because Leon, I mean, let's talk about transition with you. You you're often just thrown into the lion's den when it comes to transition and having to move rather quickly.
right. Yeah. So, you know me, like,
Mhm.
I sat down with a piece of paper and I made a timeline, and that's how I did it. So spiritually, again, I had this kind of numbness around me because that's how I become when just something needs to happen.
Mhm.
I kick into high gear. I become about the tasks and completing the tasks, and kind of any emotion I feel around it kind of gets pushed to the side.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of what happened. I just kind of had this numbness because
Mhm.
something needed to get done.
Mhm.
And I had to make sure that that thing got done. But I also had a therapist. So I would speak to my therapist regularly. Still, I kept that appointment up during this time. I was working at an older folks' home. I was working at an assisted living home, which was an absolutely beautiful experience to do in the middle of COVID. And so I say that to say I had this job as well that I had to kind of coordinate. And um, again, just I decided to work up to the last minute because I just thought I could do everything at the same time. So I didn't really have space to sit down and think, my God, this is happening. That moment probably didn't show up for me until I got to DC. The truck was unpacked, everything was unpacked and like all over the place.
Mhm.
And it took me like 2 weeks to get settled, which is unusual for me.
Mhm.
I'm usually settled into an apartment within a week. And by
Mhm.
settled, I mean things are on the wall, everything is in its place. It's very, it's my home has come together because my home is so important to me.
Right.
And I would say I sat on the sofa for like 2 to 3 weeks,
Mhm.
where it took me a while to like really unpack and get settled and really just kind of overcome the inertia of wanting to do nothing. It's like once my
Mhm.
cable and internet was set up, I did nothing.
Yeah. What were you
So,
processing?
um, I think I was processing this move to DC. I was living in a very lively neighborhood. My apartment was very different. And like I said, my home is really important to me.
Mhm.
And I moved to this place sight unseen because, again, COVID, and I just didn't have time to make the trip down to DC. And so I went from a place that had like loft windows and lots of natural light to almost like a shotgun type apartment that didn't
Okay.
have a ton of natural light. So it was really dark. It had dark floors. It's beautiful. It's great. It had all the important amenities that I needed, but it just didn't have that sunlight,
Mhm.
which I didn't realize was so important to me.
Mhm.
And so, it's so I was just kind of, I think, processing a lot of the uncertainty as well, because
Right.
this was a new state. I had to figure out all my certifications. I was going into this clinical site where I didn't know anyone. I just
Mhm.
knew the director. So I was working with, and they were all Black midwives except for one. And
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, all Black midwives except there's one midwife and who's not Black. And so, yeah, so it was also kind of working in that environment. I'd never worked in an all Black environment, and all my patients, the majority of the patients were Black. And that was a new experience for me too. So there was a lot of anxiety, I think, around that of,
Mhm.
okay, what's this going to be like?
Mhm. Okay, let's take a couple of steps back, and
Sure.
I've been dying to ask you this question. As soon as you walked into the birthing room for the very first time, what was that experience like for you? And like, did you have any emotional response at all, or like, what was that like?
Um, so the first time I remember it was chaotic. So I actually had my first catch with Yale before I left.
Okay.
And it was chaotic that day in triage. And the patient that I ended up catching, I didn't think I would catch her because um when she came in, like she had just come in, wasn't quite in active labor, in a lot of pain, but it was because she was dehydrated. So I just didn't think it was going to happen in a 12-hour shift. There was already somebody who was much farther along um, in her labor process that I thought, okay, that's going to be the first baby I catch. And this person, the person I ended up catching, she's a great patient. We got along really well. Like I
Mhm.
connected with her really well. And she was very excited for me because she found out she was my first catch
Wow.
and that doing cervical checks and everything, it was my first time ever doing it. So I was just really, I think it was just I was a bit overwhelmed because I was finally taking knowledge that I learned in the classroom and applying it and
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, this is what we were talking about. Oh, this is what we meant." Um, but it really helped because the patient, like everybody, was really supportive of the fact that this was my first time, and I don't like walking into a situation and not knowing what I'm doing,
Mhm.
which is, I mean, midwifery is kind of help me get rid of that trait. But
Mm.
it was intimidating. It was overwhelming. It was exciting at the same time. But yeah,
When did you know that you made the right choice in pursuing this path?
um, I think with that birth, there's a photo. I didn't want to take a photo. We always the tradition at my school is to take a photo after your first catch, and I think I
Mhm.
went in and did a couple of selfies, and I was like, I look like an auntie. I'm not this is whack. And my preceptor was insistent on taking these photos. She was
Mhm.
insistent. And so she took a photo of me and she happened to catch me kind of in the middle of like going, "Oh my god, I caught a baby." And so the
Mm.
excitement of that comes through. And it wasn't until I looked at the photo that I say, "Wow, this is like, amazing." And so I think that was the moment I knew. I said, "Oh, okay, this is for me." I still don't quite know what I'm doing, but this feels good. I don't mind not quite knowing what I'm doing. This feels right.
Wow. I love that. This feels right. So, for so many people listening to this podcast, as you know, it is a lot of my guests are, walk, by faith, and they're just stepping into a lot of these new scenarios that they've never ever experienced before. What do you say to people who have the most difficult time with transitions or walking blindly into scenarios where they need to have that added boost of faith to push them beyond their fears?
Hmm. I would say to break it into small chunks. That's what I did. If I
Mm.
looked at this path, whenever I looked at this path in its entirety, I was overwhelmed by it.
Right.
There was a sense of I can't, like you're actually going to do this. Um, and trust me, I was like that up until, like I said, probably that March, April of 2021. There was this, you're actually doing this. Um, but I broke it into small goals. I'm pretty goal oriented. And so I just by breaking it up into those small goals, it didn't seem so overwhelming, and it seemed doable. And so that's what I would tell people, and then to just do it. If anything, I feel like COVID or just our political environment, just to save this world, has taught me it has been to be very much in the present and to
Hmm.
do things when you have that opportunity to do them. And so that's what I would encourage folks to do. And it doesn't have to be this big bang approach. There are some personalities where,
Right.
yes, bang is just kind of like, that's the way that they have to do it. If that's not your jam, then it can be as small as making that phone call or sending that email for more information,
Hmm.
that kind of gets you started. So it doesn't have to be this, I quit my job, I applied, like I quit
Yes.
my job in order to feel like, oh, I've
Hmm.
done it. No, it can be just I'm going to go sit in on this information session.
Hmm.
And that is powerful in itself because you sit with other people who are now in this field and you get to look at folks and say, oh, these are potentially my peers. And you might end up leaving there feeling like, yes, this is for me. And hopefully, if that's your feeling, then it leads you to then explore and do more things.
Leon, I love that because so many people think that it has to be this big, gigantic, out of this world, transformation. And we tend to discount the little by little by little, steps that it can take to create that transformation that we really want. One thing that I'm very curious about, and you sort of gave us a little bit of foreshadowing, being a Black woman, and you were saying in an all Black space beyond, one midwife and then the patients. What was that even like, for you professionally and even, just emotionally? Like I go ahead.
No, so it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. There um, is a culture that we have as Black people, that is distinct and very much our own. And I was just in that culture. Um, it was my patients. I loved patients that loved the fact that I was Black, even
Mm,
though they knew that most of the providers were Black,
right.
because the provider would tell them a student's going to come in, and I would come in and they would be happy. They loved that I had purple hair. I had dreads, purple dreads.
Uh,
I have purple dreads. I have tattoos. I have a uterus tattoo behind my ear. And they seemed to really, like that. And I liked being in an environment that appreciated that.
hmm.
There were patients, I remember there was one patient that didn't want a student. She didn't want a student to labor with her. And the only reason that she let me stay was, and she described it this way, she said, I let you stay because it got a little too crunchy in here, which just meant, hopefully everybody knows what that means. She was like, that's why I let you stay. She was like, so I was fine with you staying. And we ended up having a great, birth and a great relationship. But I loved that. I loved being in that space, and having this unspoken understanding of patients. And,
Mm,
um, and then with the midwifery team, it just felt very comfortable. It felt
mm,
very familiar. Some of those people are now some of just going to be friends for life, like actual like sisters.
mhm.
So it was a beautiful experience, and it got real because they're kind of like family, and family gets real sometimes.
Right.
But I never felt in expressing myself that my midwifery career was ever in at like threatened, in danger.
By you being yourself, you're saying.
By me, yes, yeah, by me being myself, by me expressing maybe how I
Hmm.
was feeling or speaking up, like I just never felt like, the site was going to call my school and say, she's got to go home, get her out
Yeah.
of here.
I mean,
So I was, yeah, afraid.
literally the importance of being seen,
Hmm.
and being valued in a space. I mean, it's nothing like that, especially when you can do that with other people of color.
Right, exactly. And just having certain conversations with patients and feeling patients trust me as a result,
Hmm.
um, just felt really really good. It felt really good. I absolutely love my patients.
Yeah. And earlier on the podcast, you spoke about this metamorphosis, this,
Mhm.
experience that you had towards the latter part of your career. And I am assuming that this was the sort of culmination of a lot of that. What was that metamorphosis like for things that we have not touched upon?
So midwifery was amazing for me because it just, I think on one hand, from just a purely just professional standpoint,
Hmm.
it removed this distraction of I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not happy in my career. It's like midwifery, it was like, oh great. Now my career, my professional life is settled.
Hmm.
But there was still this kind of unsettling thing that was happening. I didn't understand what that was.
Hmm.
And it started, I just tell the whole story, just kind of,
This is
yeah,
your
just
world. You got this. Go ahead.
so. So it started out as a crush. That's all I can sit here and say is
Hmm.
I met somebody and it was a woman. And I had a crush on her, and I had crushes on women in the past, and but still very much identified as a straight woman in a very like heteronormative way,
Hmm.
and so when I developed this crush on this woman, it wasn't a surprise,
Hmm.
in terms of like, what is this? Um, and so I then, as I just began speaking with her and getting to know her more, the crush kind of became a little bit more intense, but I was still thinking of like fling. This is a fling that I'm having,
Like a
or that
phase you were
I want.
thinking, or
Yeah,
okay, okay.
like a phase, and all I want to do is fling it out with her. That's it.
Got
Because
it.
again, I'm much a straight woman who's plans on marrying a man and having a baby and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And then, towards the end of my program, again around April, May, we were just having conversation, and she and I had spoken before over the phone and things like that, and I had talked about my past
Mhm.
dating life and kind of dating both. And she never sat there and asked me if I was queer. Never, ever. She was never very intrusive. She just held a space for
Mhm.
me. And
And
she
she's
never reacted
queer.
strongly. And she's queer.
Okay.
Yes, she's a queer woman.
Mhm.
And she never reacted strongly, but, she just allowed me to just talk and have this space.
Hmm.
And around May timeframe, she just out of the blue asked me this question: would I ever marry a woman? And I sat up. It was like my soul finally said, finally, somebody's asked me the right question. And I sat up and I said, yes, absolutely. And something else happened where we each had to go. And so there was no kind of opportunity for me to break this down. But I just remember in that moment being like, really, Leon? You would like what? Where did that come from? And it started this process of really unlocking a part of me that I hadn't known. Well, I think I knew was there, but didn't know what it was. And
Hmm.
I spoke earlier about this numbness, having this like being numb.
Hmm.
And I always walked through life feeling numb, feeling like I didn't belong, feeling
Hmm.
out of place. And in unlocking kind of this part of me, it answered a lot. And um, when I think about the events that led to her asking me that question,
Mhm.
you kind of look back and you're just like, wow, so many things, like, the universe had to line up in a way to present that opportunity to ask me that question in that moment,
Hmm.
because so many things should have happened that day that didn't allow that moment to happen. or shouldn't have allowed that moment to happen, but it didn't. Like, it lined up and allowed for that moment. And initially I made it about her, and I had to really sit back and think about it. And, thinking, Leonne, she didn't ask you to marry her. She asked you if you just wanted to marry a woman.
Mm.
And, it forced me to kind of push her aside because there were things going on in her life that didn't allow for us to fling. I'll say it
Mm.
that way in the beginning, which was good. I'm happy for that because I think um, if that would have happened, if we would have connected earlier, I think I would have left still thinking I'm a straight girl who had a crush on a
Right.
girl. Um, and so I really started really thinking about this, um, and trying to kind of take her out of the picture because I also wanted to make sure I wasn't, I think the phrase now is like gay baiting, or, what I call like queer cosplaying. Like, I wasn't pretending to be queer for her.
Mm.
And, I really started thinking about it. And one day I was driving in my car and I just thought, man, what if I'm queer? I'm going
Mm.
to text my brothers and tell them I'm queer. And the minute I thought that, just the tears appeared. And I became
Oh.
really happy
Mm.
and I was crying and I was just like, oh my God. And then again, that's when I did a look back and I said, wow, now my life makes complete sense. That feeling of not belonging, that feeling of, um, you know, I always felt I was born at the wrong time into the wrong
Mm.
family. The reason why in Women in Brewster Place I was attracted to the queer couple and their story. The reason why with Color Purple I was attracted to like Celie and Suge's story, and why, that I wanted to understand more as a young child, and nobody would explain it to me. It was just kind of like they're roommates, and that's what they said. And I was just like, okay, I don't understand why people hate them as roommates, but um, but finally, um having now the language to express who I was. And that's what queerness did. Like, or just identifying as queer did all of a sudden. It opened me up to a world of possibility
Mm.
that wasn't there when I was living in this very heteronormative box. Even with the person that kind of, I say, just kind of led me out of this metaphorical closet, which was not at all her intention. Um, and it wasn't even something she realized she did. But even with her, and I look back to when I first met her and kind of had that zing, that spark or
Mm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and within the hetero space, what I did was I basically hypersexualized that spark, right?
Mm.
Because it was like within that space, identifying as a straight woman, really the only way I can sit here and crush on another woman is if it becomes sexual.
Right.
In my opinion, that's kind of what
Mhm.
the danger of like heterosexuality does, and thinking very much in that binary. And when I identified as queer and I looked at my life through a queer lens, it opened it up to where now I saw her more as a whole person. And
Hmm.
it was like, oh, is this how people feel when they're just like, I may have met my future wife or something?
Hmm.
Like that's what my feelings were. And it gave me this language now to now describe what I felt for her
Mhm.
when I met her and as I continue to get to know her. Um, and the way I have a friend, Sean Crawley, who does a lot of work around Black queerness, and he's constantly said, queerness allows us to imagine what is otherwise possible, and that is what it did for me. Realizing this space, or in this space, I was like, oh, I now understand and realize that other things are possible for myself. I started thinking about having children, it excites me to think about having children with a woman as opposed to with a man. Um, it just, my life just seemed, I just all of a sudden now had hope. And, I kind of go back to the person that, kind of led me out and even thinking like, oh my God, this, um, have I met kind of my wife? Even in that, it's like, I don't know. I don't know where that will end up or if it will end up anywhere. Um, but it gave me kind of this hope of now, of kind of saying, oh, even if I don't end up with her, she'll be happy with whomever, and I'll be happy with whomever because there's somebody else out there for
Yeah.
me. I didn't have that same thing in the heterosexual space. I was very tied to meeting somebody, having children, and then feeling normal. So there, I used to put a lot on finding somebody because I was like, I want to feel normal because that's what normal is, because
Mm.
that's what I was taught was normal. Um, and in embracing my queerness, it was like, oh, there's so much more to life, you know? So yeah.
First of all, Leon, I want to say thank you for sharing this with the community, with me, and I want to congratulate you on
Mhm.
having this experience, embracing the experience, and also just opening yourself up, I think, to the fullest expression of who you possibly could become and who you were.
Yeah.
That numbness part, like, to know what that feels like, to
Yeah.
understand what you're walking around in the world like. One thing that really struck me, and you're so courageous for sharing this very publicly, is your life was open to the possibilities. What are the possibilities that you see for yourself now?
Um, so it's really simple, but I just see myself as being happy. I think
Wow.
before I was so used to being unhappy or just not fully understanding and experiencing happiness that I just
Mm.
thought this is what life is. Um, and, there are days where it got really dark, very, very dark.
Mm.
And I was thankful because there was always like a little bit of light there. There was like a flicker of light.
Mm.
And I promised myself to always follow that light. Um, and I haven't had days like that since. I, you know, it's like the possibility now of, like I said, possibly having children, having a life partner that, I think I could be with them for life. Before, I
Mm.
used to say, whatever man I marry has to understand that maybe at 65, 70, I might leave them for a woman. That's probably what's going to happen. Um, and so now it's like, no, I don't think I'm going to have that sort of disruption. I mean, who knows? And I think it's just having options, having hope, and not just in the partnership space, but even in the career space now. And I don't know. It just has opened up. It's like scales have been removed from my eyes. And I mean, it's really corny, but I used to walk around very guarded. Again, I think guarding this part of myself that I didn't understand that I was guarding. And so as a
Mm.
result, that numbness was me. I couldn't experience any emotion
Mm.
really till its fullness, except for sadness. I think sadness I was able to really truly experience, or like loneliness and isolation.
Mhm.
Those very familiar with. But the other parts, especially in community with other people, I couldn't really fully experience that. I couldn't feel love from another person,
Mm.
whether it be platonic or romantic, whatever. I just couldn't experience that. And once I was able to access this part of myself, I understood and realized how many people loved me. Um,
Mhm.
And I really saw what and who I had around me. Um, and so, yeah, the possibilities now to me are just, I don't have any, I don't really have the language, but they're just kind of like endless. I don't,
Wow.
it's like I can do anything now. And before I knew I could do anything, but it was like, it was do anything but walking this very, very tight rope and or do anything and just kind of lugging something with me that I didn't know what it was. I thought it was just life, but I just and now it's just a lot lighter and I'm no longer walking this tightrope. I have like a much broader pathway now to walk.
Yeah, a much broader pathway to walk, kind of like carrying suitcase full of bricks that you don't even know why you're carrying it or even identifying
Right.
what it
And
is.
you don't even realize that you're
No.
carrying. That's
Yeah.
that I just again I saw the dangers of a heteronormative space or culture,
Mhm.
you know, um, because I didn't, the reason why I never really explored queerness before or defined what I was doing as exploring queerness was because I didn't understand it was an option. I
Hmm.
didn't understand it was available to me because
Mm.
I didn't grow up seeing it reflected back to me.
Mhm.
So it was something that was not even in this realm of possibility
Hmm.
for me. It was, my my only option was to marry a man and have his children
Mhm.
and try to have a career at the same time. Um, and so, yeah.
Do you think at all at any point when you conversation or leading up to this, do you think that you had to make yourself available to this realization, to this epiphany? Was there any like spiritual maturity that you had to get through in order to have that moment of breakthrough or no?
Um, hmm. I think so, definitely. So I don't think it was in that moment,
Hmm.
um, but it was, it's something that started, I think, years ago. So even starting with coaching with you, going to church, which a lot of people will be like church, but the church I attended is very open.
Hmm.
The park, it was very like, open and welcoming to everybody. And you saw queer folks affirmed constantly in that
Hmm.
space. Um, and I think those sorts of things, it started by just helping to kind of soften. I think soften
Mm.
some things that had hardened, and
Hmm.
then kind of started peeling things back as a result of that. It just kind of, just started peeling those things. I think with each spiritual experience or each person that I met, it just helped soften that hardness and started to make it just soft enough to start peeling away
Yeah.
at things. And so when my friend asked me that question, it was literally like I was ripe. And it's so funny because my best friend had said to me before that moment, she was like, "You just seem so ripe and ready for," she's like, "I don't know what for, but you just seem so, like ripe and ready. Like, I just
Wow.
want you to
Yeah.
be happy." Like my best friend would constantly say, "I just
Mm.
want you to be happy. I want you to be happy."
Mm.
And at this moment, you just seem ready. And I was just like, yeah, I guess. And not understanding, I think, what that was until looking back and being like, oh, I was
Right.
ready for that moment. Just, and that simple question,
Hmm.
which is just, I love that it was just this question. And it was like, I just had a choice.
Mm.
um it gave me a choice. And this is, I would say, like the third time something like that has happened,
Mhm.
that major, in my life. And each time it's happened, it's always a choice. It's either me deciding to ask a certain question, um that person asking me a question and me deciding to answer that question honestly,
Mhm.
or me deciding to, somebody maybe saying something to me and me deciding to dig deeper, kind of follow that thread. Um, and I love it. I love how it was gentle
Hmm.
as well. Another thing spiritually that I started to do was really start looking at like African traditional religions and
Mm.
working with ancestors. And so I feel like it just all kind of came to a head, a moment.
Mm.
And that's why I said, I was birthed. I became a midwife, but I also, and that wasn't the full birth. Like the full birth was me becoming kind of me becoming a queer midwife. And I don't even know if I'm done. That's the whole thing. It's
Right.
like, oh, next.
Yeah. There's so much evolution. Leon, before I let you go, one thing that I'm really curious about, and I think it might be really helpful for our online and audio listeners, how did you separate yourself, or excuse me, separate the person of her asking you the question and it not being about her? How did you have like the I guess the sense or the capacity to take her out of the equation so that you could fully look at yourself?
Um,
That's not easy to do for a lot of
it's not
us.
easy. I know it's not easy. Um, I don't know. So one thing I will say is I'm very good at deep diving,
Hmm.
deep diving my emotions, saying something. I'm very good at deep diving. I'm very good at pinpointing. Um, I don't think. Okay, so probably saying I fully removed her is not quite accurate. I just didn't center it on her.
Ah,
So
okay.
basically, I didn't make it about her. It wasn't the only woman I will ever be with is her.
Right.
I guess I just started thinking, well, what if it wasn't her?
Hmm.
What if, and then also, sorry, just train of thought. I started looking back at my life, like, where else has this happened?
Hmm.
And it's just kind of like this thread. And the only way I can describe it is it's a thread. And, say I'm like, you're in a mine, and you know how people wear those little mine hats and you have that light and you can only maybe see 6 feet in front of you.
Right.
So I'm pulling a thread with that sort of visibility, right? With visibility that's only 6 feet in front of me. And I'm just continuing to pull and follow that thread. I don't know where it's going, but that's what I'm doing. And that's how I am when I get into the situation where it's like, there's more here. So I just focused on that thread. And for me, this thread was I said I would marry a woman.
Hmm.
It's not her,
Yeah.
it's a woman. Where the hell did that come from? And I'm friends with her. I don't want to like pretend for her because that's not right. So is
Mm.
that what you're doing here? Because you said you would marry a woman.
Hmm.
What is this? And so that was kind of the thread of
Hmm.
it. And that's very different than me saying I would marry a woman and it would be her. It
Right.
can only be her. And she has to be part of this story and she has to be the thread. So to me that's how I do it. It's just kind of take the variables out of it.
Mm.
And I focused on what was the most shocking thing. And it was the fact that I said I would marry a woman.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I meant
And centering the truth on you rather than her being the gatekeeper for your truth.
exactly, exactly. Which I understand. Like I've done that before with folks where I understand the temptation
Hmm.
to do that. But I also feel like, or at least for me, I recognize that, oh, she was a distraction
Hmm.
to it. And so again, it's that choice. And I spoke about before, I had a choice.
Right.
And so my choice could have been focus on her and wanting to be with her, or focus on the fact that she's a woman. And now I've said, I realize I want to be with a woman.
Hmm.
And so it's like, so I just decided to, I guess, pull back and broaden my vision and just follow that thread. and that thread led me to a pride flag. So
Wow. I remember early on in our time together and throughout our friendship, and literally in the last podcast, asking you where God is in all of this, and you doing a lot of this leap of faith, and essentially you said, God, wherever you lead me, I will go.
mhm.
And for yourself, where is God or Holy Spirit, whatever language you want to use, in this evolution of you?
um God's right there.
Yeah.
They're right there. I don't know. It's funny because that is an actual hard question for me to answer,
Mm.
because for me the concept of God is so abstract and it's really hard for me to think in the abstract. Um, but God or the universe, my ancestors,
Mm.
they are the ones who are kind of helping to create the path, lead the path, like kind of create the path, help show me the path. Um, and also, I think, direct people or events on that path that will help
Mm.
enrich that path. Like that to me is where how God fits in. And there's a song by Jonathan Nelson, I think his name is, called to Be. And that was like my anthem.
That is my
Yeah.
favorite song.
Favorite song.
Do you remember at the park when
Yeah, that's when I first heard that
Me
song.
too.
Let me tell you. Yes. And I cannot remember the gentleman's name that sang it, but he did amazing service to that song. And I downloaded it immediately because I mean, in church, it made me cry. But yes, because it was your sermon. You were giving a
Rahul,
sermon,
yeah,
right?
Razul,
So,
yes.
yes, you were giving a sermon. And that song was like, because again, that was at the beginning of this work. I hadn't gone to school yet, but knew I was going. And I listened to that song almost every day, to kind of help ground me
Yeah.
in this. And I continue to listen to that song to help ground me. Um, and I mean, the song is all about like, Lord, I'm going to, I'm going to where I'm called to be.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, then I think it was very much about midwifery and helping to ground me in that. And now I would say it's really kind of expanded now to be more about my life and really continuing to follow the intuition that's led me to this point. Um, yeah.
Which has led me to this point. I remember a big part of your focus was to be a midwife to the Black and Brown community, to the LGBTQIAA community, and to
Yeah.
be an ally and all of that. And look where life has brought you today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And I still, of course, still plan to be that midwife.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's just the last like 3 months, I would say, have been amazing, which again, when you talk about possibility, it just makes me excited to know, okay, where the next 3 months, what's the next 3 years, 30 years, going to lead for me. Cause now I'm 42,
Mm.
and I am starting a new life, like a second life at 42, which is pretty amazing. And so yeah, but yeah, my slogan is now kind of Black liberation through birthwork. Now I'm trying to understand what
Mm.
that means. But that's where I feel like my work is, or my part in this work. That's what it is.
Leon, listen, I am overwhelmed by this conversation. I am in full gratitude of this conversation, and I am just in awe of you. and all of who you are, your gifts and your talents, and just the essence, honestly, of who you are becoming, who you are today. Um, any last parting words you just want to share with our community and this platform? Again, I think it's so courageous for you to come and share so much of yourself with us. Anything else that we can do to support you or uplift you in any way?
Um, the only thing I will sit here and say is to live your truth.
Hmm.
And like really live your truth. I think I spent so much time unknowingly not living my truth, living a very guarded life.
Yeah.
And while I got things done, um, I think I made it harder on myself than it needed to be
Hmm.
as a result. And so, I've made a promise to myself to just not be guarded, to speak my truth. If I get asked a question, I answer it truthfully, kind of no matter what it is. Um, as opposed to trying to say what makes me look nice or sound nice or whatever. And I think, just living your truth, and as Tabitha Brown says, minding your own business.
Okay.
So mind your own business.
Mind
Keep your
your own business. So before I let you go, where are you in the process? And if folks want you to be their midwife, like what do we do? How do we connect with you? Like where are you in this process now?
So probably the easiest thing is to follow my social media.
Mhm.
I am currently going to be taking my boards in the next month. And then after that, I don't know where I'm going to end up.
Okay.
I will be, I'm leaving DC. I'm probably not going to remain in the DC area. So I'm leaving DC, putting my stuff in storage, going on a road trip, probably
Good.
hanging out for like a month plus. Um, but the easiest thing is probably just to follow my social media and, yeah.
Leon, where can we connect with you to learn more about you and to also just be able to figure out your journey, be on the journey with you?
Sure. So I only really have Instagram.
Mhm.
And so it's my name, Leonne, the number 11, so 11 underscore. And that's my social media, which I'm sure you'll put in the byline as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the best way to connect with me. A lot of people after the first podcast had questions about how to become a midwife.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to talk about that. There are multiple ways. I just went one particular way. But I'm happy to talk about that. I'm happy to connect folks with different organizations. Only thing I can't do is give you medical advice.
Okay.
Yes.
So, in fair tradition, as I said in the first podcast, there's going to be a part 3. I already know it and I feel it coming on.
Okay.
But Leon, thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Klay. It's so good to see you.
You too. You too. I'm so glad that we've had an opportunity to come together. And so listen, folks, I'll be sure to have Leon's contact information in the show notes. You can learn more about me by visiting clayaskWilliams.com. And I'm on all of your favorite social media by the handle of @Plan A with Klay. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you on a very next episode of Plan A Conversations. Peace, guys.